Good morning, all. Welcome to the Sunday morning worship service from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York. I'm the Reverend Jen Raffensperger, the minister of this congregation. By now, if you've been with us before, you might have noticed that things look a little different than they do most weeks. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Please do introduce yourself in the chat if you would like to. Given the busy holiday week and weekend that many of us are having, we are presenting to you a shorter, quiet, and contemplative service this morning. Our tech team works so hard every week. This week, we're giving them mostly a break. Robert did make some great graphics for us there with that order of service. I'm going to be guiding us through a practice of Lectio Divina, sacred reading. Our congregational mission of spiritual transformation, of work for a more equitable world, and of education and engagement for people of all ages invites us this morning into a space of learning and consideration. And a final note before we begin, we're actually sharing matters of the heart pretty quickly today, actually after this hymn. So if there is a joy or a sorrow, a concern in your heart that you would like for us to share with the community, please go ahead and write it in the chat sooner rather than later, though you can always share it whenever the Spirit moves. We do save the chat and reach out as appropriate. And now, I invite you to settle yourself comfortably, whatever that means for you physically, and prepare yourself for worship as we hear the sound of the bell. Light our chalice this morning with these words by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. Our light is the light of the sun, keeper of all we love. Our light is the light of the earth, provider of sustenance. Our light is the light of all living things, life precious like our own. Our light is the light of each of us, bound together in need and hope. Our light is the light of the cosmos, keeper of all we know. And so now we come to the heart of our service today, which is Lectio Divina. I'm inviting us into this practice this morning. Lectio Divina literally means divine reading. Lectio Divina is an ancient Christian monastic practice dating to the 6th century of the Common Era, when the rules were codified by Saint Benedict. Although it's an interesting historical note that the idea of sitting quietly with a single piece of Christian scripture seems to be traceable to Origen Adamantius, a scholar from the 3rd century Common Era, often claimed as one of the first universalists. Over the centuries, this practice has moved away from one that focuses only on Christian scriptures, although it is still used in that context. Close reading of other sacred texts from other traditions, close reading of important works of fiction and poetry. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of my favorite podcasts is called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. And that takes listeners on deep dives into the Harry Potter books as a way of pausing for examination, questioning, and contemplation. And this work of sacred reading of those texts in that particular podcast has also done a great deal to make space for fans of the Harry Potter series to grapple with while feeling more safe from the transphobia on unfortunate display from the book's author. By treating a text as sacred, any text that feels meaningful or important to us, any text that strikes a chord, we invite ourselves to slow down and to ask questions, both of the text and of ourselves. Lectio Divina asks that we read through a text several times. There are 4 steps to Lectio Divina, so we're going to hear our text 4 times this morning. And today I have chosen a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, often titled in English, The Night. It is not necessary for you to have read this poem ahead of time. The text of the poem was sent out in worship reminder emails this week, but not all of you receive our worship reminder emails. You may be new, or we may have to fix you on the list. Or those emails might have been lost in the shuffle of your inbox, overflowing with holiday reminders and sale offers. So I'm going to paste a link to the text of the poem in the chat. I'll be reading the poem out loud at the start of each section, so you do not have to click on the link if you don't want to. It's a short poem, but I did want to provide the actual text for both those who may be visual or textual learners right now, and for anyone who might feel inspired to spend more time with the poem later, perhaps to journal about it or to share it or discuss it with a friend. The first step of Lectio Divina is to read the text. As I read the poem for you the first time, please pay special attention to any word or phrase that might stick out for you. Also pay attention to emotional reactions you might have to any of the particular images or phrases. Each time I read the poem, I will leave a time of silence at the end before sharing my own reflection on that step. Again, the poem is The Night by Rainer Maria Rilke, translated from the German by Anita Barrows and Joanna Macy. You, darkness, of whom I am born, I love you more than the flame that limits the world to the circle it illuminates and excludes all the rest. But the dark embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me, people, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me. I believe in the night. For me, reading the poem at the time when I sat down to write this reflection, the words that struck me most were darkness, flame, illuminates, excludes, embraces, and imagine. And there's that image, that great presence stirring beside me. Within the context of what I know about Rilke and about this poem, published as part of a collection titled The Book of Hours, Love Poems to God, I imagine that Rilke's own sense of the divine is what he feels stirring. But that's textual analysis, not sacred reading. It can be a challenge to set aside my intellect, to set aside those things we may know in context and let ourselves simply absorb a particular piece of text. My emotional reaction to this text tends to be one of aspiration. The darkness, this darker time of year, is challenging for me. I'm somewhat seasonally affected and tend to be drawn to images of light and warmth more so than cold and darkness. But yet I feel a sense of great comfort and welcome in Rilke's words, and I aspire to feel that way about the dark. The second step of Lectio Divina is to reflect on those specific words, thoughts, emotions, or images that were most striking to you on the first read through of the text. I will now read the poem again. You, darkness, of whom I am born, I love you more than the flame that limits the world to the circle it illuminates and excludes all the rest. But the dark embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me, poetry, people, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me. I believe in the night. What strikes me most right now, again, at the time I was sitting down to write these reflections, is that there are limitations on being open to the voices and images of the moment by choosing to work with the text in this shared format. But one of the gifts of deep work with a text is how that text can change for you over time. I've read this poem many times in my life, especially as my love of all poetry in general and Rilke's poetry specifically expanded greatly during my years in seminary. For all the value of learning, engaging, reflecting, and growing knowledge by reading thick tomes of theology, I think there's more in poetry that informs my daily approach to ministry. Of course, the longer works also provide me with a theological and spiritual underpinning without which my own engagement with poetry might be quite different. I recently read the book In the Shelter, Finding a Home in the World, a spiritual autobiography by Irish poet and theologian Padraig Ó Tuama. In that book, he shares a quote from British poet and playwright Carol Ann Duffy, and I'll share the brief passage of the book with you now where he refers to this. I heard Carol Ann Duffy say recently that she thinks that if she believed in God, she would find prayer most consoling, because to pray is to believe that someone is listening. For everybody else, she said, there's poetry. I sat and thanked God or whoever might be listening for prayer and poetry. Whoever might be listening. And what I find myself reflecting on is the idea of addressing, of conversing with the darkness. It can be easy for me as the days grow shorter to haul out the therapy lamps, grit my teeth to kind of push through whatever is coming. But But surely there's also a value in examining my own relationship with darkness, how it's changed over time. Darkness can signal rest. Darkness is where the roots of plants, the networks of mycelium create all the majesty of every forest. Darkness eases the eyes and can amplify the other senses. The third step of Lectio Divina is to respond to the text. One way I often engage this part of the practice is to write in my journal. I am a verbal processor, and I find that writing things out in longhand forces me to make more time for them than I might otherwise take. Today, I'm going to read the poem again, pause, share a few brief thoughts, and then engage with some of your responses in the chat. For now, though, let's hear the poem for a third time. You, darkness of whom I am born, I love you more than the flame that limits the world to the circle it illuminates and excludes all the rest. But the dark embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me, people, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me. I believe in the night. Today is the first Sunday of Advent in the Christian calendar, the period of preparation for the 4 weeks leading up to the Feast of the Incarnation, Christmas Day. Tonight at sundown is also the first night of Hanukkah in the Jewish calendar, the Festival of Lights, the celebration of the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem after the Maccabean revolt in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Both of these celebrations have great cultural significance in 21st century American culture, as well as in their own specific religious contexts. Both Advent and Hanukkah make the lighting of candles a devotional act. And of course, the act of lighting a candle flame within our chalice is how we begin each gathering of Unitarian Universalists, and is in fact the symbol of our faith. When I was a kid, I loved the Peanuts cartoon by Charles Schulz, and let's be honest, I still do. One of my favorite of those comic strips has Charlie Brown asking Linus, who's holding a lit candle, "What's this?" And Linus replies, "I have heard that it is better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness." Charlie Brown agrees, "That's true, though there will always be those who disagree with you." And then in the final 4th panel of the comic, Linus's sister Lucy is standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by the dark of night and shouting, "You stupid darkness!" You stupid darkness indeed. So many holidays at this time of year invite and encourage us to light candles, to hang up display of lights and bright ornaments that reflect light back to our eyes over and over again. There's an overly simplistic narrative that we hear again and again. Dark equals bad, light equals good. Simple binaries always worry me, and they should. We should question simple narratives that black is bad or white is good, this complicated and incorrect moral valence upon which has hung the pain of so much injustice. We should question that as we should question any simple binary. Very little in life is all one thing or the other. Rather than either or, I try to strive to see the both and in everything. I struggled with it myself this week for the Thanksgiving holiday. Is this a day of gratitude or a day of mourning for the genocide of Native Americans in the name of colonial empire? It's both and. We can celebrate the lighting of each candle in each chalice. I picked with not a small amount of glee, a chalice lighting today called Hymn to the Light. And we can also celebrate the expansive invitation of darkness. We can embrace as home those things circumscribed within the light of our candles. And we can recognize the gorgeous beauty and mystery of the larger world we cannot see, and the imagination that fills the darkness, both with wonders and with things to fear. I will not curse the darkness. I will enter into conversation with it. And right now, I invite you into conversation in the chat. What reflections have come up for you during this time? Maybe share a word or phrase that struck with you, some ideas or emotions that felt new or familiar, challenging or comforting. I'm looking back. I'm also going to leave time. There's no rush here. Thank you. Thank you, Sean, for sharing the text of the poem in the chat. And yes, there is a typo in that link, unfortunately. Paul has shared, it's hard to find darkness in this lighted environment. And that's true. We're all carrying around little lamps with us all the time, right? Catherine shares, darkness embraces everything, reminds me that within that context, faith is required, especially when I cannot see everything. Karen has shared, I love the night because then I can see my beloved stars. As a child, I'd go outside looking for Orion, a constellation that in this hemisphere is only visible at this darker time of year. Okay, this is interesting. And I'm reading them kind of without reading through them first. As you could tell with Catherine's, I stumbled a little over her words, but Leslie has shared, initially I thought the poem was dark and depressing, but after the third reading, I actually felt that flame. I felt that the flame providing light was the darkness because the light only illuminated a small area. The darkness is all encompassing, which could actually be seen as brighter than the flame. Very interesting that I thought changed my whole thought process about the poem as we went through it. That's one of those gifts of Lectio Divina. Also, of just going back and reading a favorite book or poem that you haven't read in years can be illuminated differently, right? Robert has shared, the darkness embraces. It's a great teacher. That's yeah. As I try and engage in conversation, I feel like there's got to be something here I can learn from. George and Kate are sharing, in the darkness, I can see the beautiful display of stars, planets, and airplanes in the sky, and the moon. I love that you put airplanes in there because they're pretty, right? Like they're, again, I have a constant refrain of humans are part of nature, right? So airplanes are made by humans. They are part of our natural world because pieces of our natural world made them. So thank you. I love when I can see a satellite, or how exciting it is when you can see the International Space Station in transit across the sky. Sherry has shared an indirect message, so not everyone who's looking at the chat can read it. Sometimes you can just close your eyes for your darkness fix, right? And that can be so restful. Like I'm tired and everything is loud and glary and everything feels like too much. And sometimes there's just a peace in just closing your eyes. Mike and Fatima have shared, I welcome the contemplation of the darkness, which at present heralds cold and snow dustings. The concept of a presence has me feeling accompanied and encouraged to move along. I like that feeling. We don't know what's in the dark, but we can imagine that there is something there. Or if our faith speaks to us in a specific way, we can feel the comfort and touch of that within which we put our faith. Diane shared, my time in the dark is when my theater of the mind can generate its richest images and sounds of comfort, pleasure, and hope. Theater of the mind. Thank you for that image. And this is one of the blessings of doing it this way. I don't get to experience the text necessarily very in the moment because I'm concentrating on the message. But when I am reading through your reflections, what a gift it is. The theater of the mind. We are bombarded by light and images at almost all times if we want to be now, right? So that break that Sherry spoke of and that beautiful things that you can conjure within your own mind. Susan has shared, the poem challenges me to see darkness differently. Me too. And that's one of the reasons I picked it, especially at this season of light, of when we are awaiting the return of light at the solstice. And Jenny shared, the line about excluding that which is not illuminated gives me pause to think of those who are living in darkness, be it in poverty, in ignorance, or depression. It also reminds me of those is darkness by choice and the wisdom therein. That's a real both and, Jenny, and thank you for sharing it with us. That's lovely. And Steve shares darkness in the winter solstice, followed by the cycle of hope for light and renewal every year, the opportunity to repeat this cycle. That's another thing. As someone who's seasonally affected, I do a lot of saying, we go through this to get the other. I have a friend who is just as happy for the summer solstice and the return of shorter days as I am for the winter one and the return of longer ones. So everyone finds their own meaning and space and that which brings them the most joy and comfort. Jim and Joanne, intrigued by the sharing that light only illuminates a small area while the darkness encompasses all. The stars illuminate the darkness afar. Darkness is a great equalizer. I can't remember, someone said that, we all look alike in the dark. And Diane is sharing, for David, the dark reminds us that the universe is so much more vast than our understanding. We can see what some tiny cluster of it. When we look at our stars and our moons and our airplanes that we have sung the praises of already, so much more vast than our understanding. Leslie shared, light and darkness bring rest and calm and time to reflect. And Bruce, we sleep in darkness and it energizes us to live another day. Thank you, Bruce, for attending your first time. Yes, I love sleeping and I do tend to sleep in darkness. And there is a real benefit for humans and our circadian rhythm. People who work third shifts and overnight shifts, it can be hard to adjust your body to sleep not at the night. It's when our bodies want to sleep. I love that there's more and more and more. This is great. Emily shared, it's possible to see in the dark once you get used to it. Sometimes we're too quick to turn on the light. I think about this when camping. If you don't turn on a flashlight, you see so much more than if you do. The moonlight reveals a lot more than a tiny flashlight. That's a great reminder, Emily, when I was saying that, when you are in darkness, sometimes your other senses can get enhanced. Our eyes can also take in a lot of light that we might not notice if we are standing by a candle or a flashlight or a lamp, right? Leanne shared, the darkness softens what I see and opens my heart to the greater presence. And Mary has shared, I love the phrase dark embraces, making dark something not to fear. And Rich said, Dojin said, the enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. I love this. I hope you've all found something in your community, fellow community members' reflections. And The whole moon and entire sky are reflected in one dewdrop on the grass. Yes, yes. We can see the vastness of nature, even in a very small lens. And we can become so open to that which we may not otherwise pay attention to in the darkness. And with that, I bring us to our final step. We've had read, reflect, respond, and now rest. The final step of Lectio Divina is rest. What a good thing that is to include rest as a purposeful part of spiritual practice. I'm going to read the poem a fourth and final time. You may want to settle in, close your eyes, and hear the words anew if you can. Hear them with the gift of all of our community's observations. And after I read the poem, we'll have a little bit longer time of silence. And after that, I'm going to go directly into sharing our next hymn. You, darkness of whom I am born, I love you more than the flame that limits the world to the circle it illuminates and excludes all the rest. But the dark embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me, people, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me. I believe in the night. This is the time during our service every week where we invite you into generosity, generosity that that expands and allows us to progress on our own congregational mission. And this congregation also always includes half of its donations go to a Share the Plate partner. We rely on the time, talent, and treasure of our members and friends in order to maintain our community, to grow our capacity, and to thrive now and in the years to come. We share the plate with community partners that honor our and that uphold our values, and we honor our own commitment to service to our local community through these generous donations. November Share the Plate partner recipient is Bell Socialization Services. Bell Socialization Services provides positive impact programs, including mental health services, intellectual disability services, homeless and housing support for our York and Adams County neighbors. Bell serves about 2,500 people each year through dozens of programs offering an array of housing and basic living supports, guided by their vision, mission, and values. Many Bell programs are licensed and or accredited to meet strict standards of quality care. With more than 50 properties throughout York and Adams counties, people using Bell services are an integral part of the greater community. And now we extinguish the chalice. And I'm not going to share a graphic of the words. I hope that you'll all remember them with me and say them along at home as we repeat these words that we share weekly. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We can extinguish our chalice flames and still choose to bless the darkness, to converse with the darkness, to believe in the night, all that it conceals, all that it challenges, all that it comforts. The dark embraces us all, just as we are. So may it be a model to us, and so may it be.